I think in 20th century, like the elves and aliens began to merge quite a bit. Like there is a lot of alien belief,
Yeah,
and some of the description of elves in the late 20th century are like, people have been watching Close Encounters of the Third Kind,
yeah,
and
right.
they envision the elves like Spielberg envisions aliens. So 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 this is all merging, and this is one thing about the paranormal. It cannot be kept separate because it's people's experiences, very much defined by culture,
Hmm.
and they see they see the thing that they're kind of culturally conditioned to see, and they interpret them in a way that is like fits with their worldview. So when the worldview changes, we get different, like maybe the experience is much the same, but there's a
Yes.
completely different definition of it because we have different ideas about how things work.
Could I change the subject from linguistics and ask you? I've got a couple of curly questions for you.
Yes, yes.
Um,
Please.
Gylfi and Aegir are
Mhm.
both described as wizards who go to see the Aesir. Obviously, in Gylfaginning and Skull Skapamal, it says that the Aesir came north and sort of taught the skills of wizardry to people. So, my question to you is, where did these guys learn wizardry before the Aesir turned up?
Yeah, yeah. That's it's a complete it's a complicated issue. It's never really explained. Like it's not that it takes place in a ICID dominated world, and then there are all the giants. They also know magic
Mm-hmm.
that
Yeah.
they learn from the ICID. Possibly there are older deities that were replaced by the ICID and turned into devils or demons or something like that.
But they
And this is
mated with them too, didn't they? Like that's the
yeah, yeah,
fact that the Aesir often, I think, even doesn't Odin have a? Wasn't his mother a giant, like a
yeah.
Jotun?
His grandfather is a giant. Yeah, one can wonder for a long time about what sort of cultural memory is being like used here. Like there's clearly something from the migration age, possibly even older, and they are in a way there's this strange dualism of the newly Christian people that's being because like if you're newly Christian and heathens are like demons, they're bad people.
Yeah,
You're also descended from them. Like the heathens were also your grandparents. So you like your grandparents, but you dislike heathens. So this is a kind of situation that newly Christian people are in, and it's very you see a lot of this in the like mythic narratives of of these like medieval age, and also this idea that the Aesir are Asians, which connects them closely to the migration period. But
mm,
it's obviously that they were like there are remnants of them in Scandinavia before the migration period. So perhaps this is like a late explanation, like
yeah,
that, like because our sources are much younger than all of these events, so things get garbled, and possibly the idea that the Aesir are Asians is a younger idea, and the Aesir are actually much older gods, and possibly like and this idea that Isil and Vanir are two sets of gods, that's clearly meant to explain that religion is not simple in the north. Like there's not a single set of gods that everyone believed in. And
Yes.
it's kind, and nobody really, no scholars really no longer believe that Snorri is correct in describing all the Aesir as related to each other. It seems more likely that these are various divine deities that are like worshipped here and there in Scandinavia, and not like a family of gods, because that seems a bit like too convenient, and also
Yeah.
really influenced by the classical gods, like the Roman gods.
A lot of people online have been very influenced by this idea that Snorri was a rabid Christian, or a really, he was a really Christian dude who was writing this stuff to sort of make out, oh, look, the gods aren't really real people.
Yeah.
And they, accuse him of this euhemerism.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. But I personally look at it and think, well, number one, Snorri says blatantly, I got these stories from old people who believe they're true. These stories are told by these skalds. And he spent probably, looks like, about 2 years with the court of Norway. And then he went across to Sweden and stayed with a magnate over there who was a skald, I think. And Snorri was a skald, and seems like a pretty good one, don't you reckon? Like, you'd know better than me, but I think that he must have been privy to a lot of stories that are completely lost now. And because I've got this more, I mean, I don't think my theories are true. The von Daniken type paleocontact stuff is true. I'm just looking at ancient stories, and I do realize that a scholar like yourself and other scholars who are just, really academically studying things clinically, that, you're still very much a humanities person, that, you're a great storyteller and a thinker. But I just feel like there's two stories there. There's the stories of gods that people believed in, flew through the sky with a chariot with goats and chased the sun. All, it's like, yeah, right. That's probably not real. But what amazed me reading Gylfaginning at the end, they sort of go, righto, see you, Gylfie. And he finds himself on the plane. What the heck happened?
Yeah.
And goes home and tells them the story. But then it says, and it doesn't seem to be an interpolation. It's like, and the gods get together, right? Who wants to be who? Right? You can be Odin. I'll be Thor. You be Freya. It seems to me it's this crew of very powerful people, and I'm thinking, high-tech people who've abducted this wizard and taken him up, and he's looked out and gone, oh my God, where am I? And he sees the earth below and sitting in, what is it, Hlidiscaf, Odin's high seat.
Yeah.
I imagine Asgard being on the ground and also up above, like in low Earth orbit. And maybe the Bifrost is some kind of bridge, like a space needle, or there's all sorts of science fiction things you come up with how they connect.
Well, it's all very vague geographically. It's all very vague geographically anyway. Like it's hard to know. Like they say heaven and then they say earth, and you cannot really make a realistic picture out of it. And maybe people shouldn't even try. And I think the frame narrative is so necessary for Snorri, because he's like researching things with a bad reputation, and he has to explain that he's a scholar, and of course he knows the Christian, like, religious history, like the official Christian history. And so he has this prologue where he said, like, oh, they're really Trojans, and all this kind of thing. And then he comes with the narratives and has two frame stories, which is kind of interesting. Like half of it is told in the Gylfi frame story, and then the rest in the Aesir, in the Aegir frame story. And obviously he was really interested in myth and infused by it, because like mythological kennings, they are all the rage when he is like with poets. And there is a degree of respect, like making him out to be somebody who has actually no interest in previous religions except to badmouth them. I don't think that's very realistic, because like, why write this stuff if you
Well,
just dismissing the whole thing? So I think there's genuine interest here, but it has to be made respectable. And also, like, when we speak of Snorri, we don't know like how he wrote. Like, he had people with him. Possibly they made the prologue for him to make him look more respectable.
yeah,
Like,
right.
prologue is very learned, and so possibly his pal Styrmir, who was working with him,
His
actually made the.
manager.
Yeah,
It,
like, it's a factory. Like, he's a magnate. Like, people in the early 20th century would envision him alone, like an author of the 20th century, like doing his thing, talking to nobody. But obviously that's not how he worked. He's a magnate, and he
this
would
is
have
interesting. Yes, this is very interesting. Is
he
that
would have
at
had.
Oddie?
He was raised there, but most of his writing probably took place in Reykholt or Borg.
Oh,
In his
Rachel. Right. That's where his pool's still there, isn't it?
Yes, well,
Yeah.
there is a pool. There is a pool, and it's old.
I want to go
So,
to that pool. I
yeah,
really
yeah,
want
yeah.
to go to that pool.
I'm not sure you're allowed to get into it.
Oh, really?
I think
Uh,
you're only asked to like look at it. But Snorri, like, he is a kind of a factory, or I envision him as a factory. Like, there's a group of people, and some of them have clerical training, and they may help him make the whole thing scholarly. Although
mm,
his nephews' poetics are more like influenced by classic tradition. Like, Snorri's work is quite original. It doesn't follow any like recognized format.
was
So,
that Sturla? What his nephew
well, it's Olavur really who made the
Oliver?
third grammatical treatise, and there you have Latin phrases, and
Uh,
so it's clear that he has more like, he is in a way more traditional. And Snorri was. Snorri was an original, but I think I never thought that he worked alone. Like,
yeah.
and he is, and like, his purpose is obviously like, clearly it's the Skoltic training that's like the beginning, and then he is just interested in mythology. But of course, like, Snorri is very garbled narrative. Like,
Mm,
like in Iceland, people read it in high school and they find it very confusing. Like,
yeah.
the people were introduced multiple times, and no editor would let it slip past them.
Well, you've got like Odin is at one time the All Father who's created everything. Then he's this
Yeah,
dude who's like dying, and he
yeah,
goes,
yeah,
"Oh, quick, give me a stab with a spear so I can tell him
yeah,
that I
yeah.
went to Valhalla." Because you know, it's that like the modern obsession of the Viking obsessed is like, I must die like a Viking. I must not die a cow's death. And then there's Odin himself going, "Oh, quick, boys, just give me a bit of a stab."
Yeah.
Um, so
This,
my followers won't go, "Oh, wait a minute. I thought we had to die in battle." There's Odin himself. He's dying in bed like a cow.
and it's like, clearly like myths from various time periods, and that are being collected, and they're trying to make a whole out of them, but it's not really. It is a collection. You can see
Mm-hmm.
that, even
Do
though
you
it's
think,
all.
like personally, do you think Snorri really was a Christian, or do you think that he might have been really into the old ways and just hid it?
Yeah, I think, like, Christianity is the official religion. It's the hegemonic religion, but there are a lot of things that are inherited from the pagan religions, and some of them are just called superstitions now,
Yeah.
but they still exist. So I think, like, most of the sources agree that there was no change from heathen to Christian in one day. And I think like a lots of the heathen customs just survived in a new context, like they were kind of a substratum of Christianity. So I think Snorri is like most people, like partly heathen, I think, and
Yeah,
partly Christian. Like the Christianity is the dominant thing. It's not what he's most interested in. Like he doesn't really write about it. But he includes kennings for Christ in his poetics. So like he is aware of it. But I think like being a Christian in those days means accepting Christianity as the religion, but you still have all your old customs.
because it's
And
essentially like modern people. I think about this a lot. I was brought up as a Christian, but in that modern, gentle
yeah,
Protestant, even Catholic, all about love.
mm,
But you go back to that time, the church wasn't like that. Everybody didn't have their own little Bible, and they didn't have prayer groups, and they didn't read the Bible. They were told what to do by the priest, who said, "This is what God says. You
yeah.
come to mass, you do what we say, you'll be sweet. Otherwise, you're a heathen." And it was sort of a dominating thing rather than
But
like,
they're also but they're also very pragmatic. So they keep the old Christmas festival that's clearly originally pagan called Yule or
yeah,
Yule, and they just like use it as like it just becomes a part of the new religion.
yeah.
So they must so sometimes it's only name changes like so and I think that's one of the reason Christianity was so successful that it could engulf other religions and just make them a part of their
I think they
religion.
just put up with it, didn't they? Like I really, when I was a kid, it shocked me when I realized that the English names of the week are pagan gods. I thought, because I was brought up in this very Protestant, strict way of thinking, I thought, what? Like how come these names made it through? How can we have a day called Woden's Day and Thor's Day and
Yeah.
Frigg's Day? How can this be? And you know,
For some for some reason, it's only in Iceland that we don't have these
yeah,
names.
I know it's
Like
funny.
Iceland, there was an Icelandic zealous bishop who wanted to outlaw the day names, and clearly he was on his own. Like the day names are still there in all the other Scandinavian language and English and even German,
Yeah,
but 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 not in Iceland.
yeah. It's a funny thing that you
But we
guys
have,
preserve so much, and yet
but
you're
not
we've
that.
we've
Yeah,
forgotten all our old pagan myths. We don't remember as a sort of an Anglo-Saxon Scottish person. I don't remember. I was never taught the thinking of my ancient ancestors, but then I say, "I'll see you on Woden's Day."
yeah,
I think it's very funny.
yeah. In Iceland, we have the third day and the fifth day.
Yeah,
I
Fyrsta
don't think
dag,
anyone. Yeah,
Onur dag,
I don't think
Vita
anyone
dag.
else. And I don't think anyone else has these days.
No, I
It's
like
just
Lorgadagen. What
yeah, yeah.
what is it that gets washed? Is it the clothes or you?
I am not sure actually,
Right,
but it is the bath day. Saturday is
right,
the bath,
right.
and then we have Sunday and Monday, just like everyone else. So come, like, ask more questions.
All right. What do you think the word Vitka means? As in like wizard, Vitka,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Vitki.
Ah, yeah, yeah, yeah. I can't really say. It's
Mm.
obviously used about like sorcerers or wise men,
Yeah.
but what the origins are. Like one thing I've tried to do is not to focus too much on the origins, because of course words have an original meaning and that is significant. But in the sources that we have, often the original meaning is not known to anyone. So this is something like I differ with Wilbur, who wrote about the meaning of troll, because like, he was interested in etymology, but the etymology of the word troll is unimportant in 13th, 14th, and 15th century sources. It just means what it means, and it means a variety of things, but none of them have anything to do with the etymology. Like it just doesn't. Language doesn't really work like that. They don't. It's not always lucid what the etymology is.
I found it fascinating that you, in one of our conversations by email, you told me that the Alfarnir were also Aesir.
Well, it's kind of unclear. Like there's a like the word Álfur is not very common in Old Icelandic. They don't make an appearance often. The elves as a clearly separated group, and very often they're grouped with the Aesir. So Aesir or Álfar. And this is like a traditional thing in poetry, and maybe it's something to do with alliteration. And but I think like there is an idea that the Álfar might be Vanir because there is a link between Freyr and the elf world, and that is also possible. But I think like I am getting closer to the idea that like the word troll, the word elf was just really broad. So it didn't at the time when that I am most interested in, like the late Middle Ages. It doesn't refer to a particular type of deity. It just means any kind of deity. So when you so possibly Álfablót that we do have in the sagas are actually it's the Aesir who are being worshipped, and Álfar means just like any kind of god, like both the most important gods and the small gods, and that can explain how disparate the usage of the word Álfur is, because very often, like it is not a race with quite definite characteristics. They do make an appearance in the Fornaldarsögur, and then they are magicians and sometimes referred to as spirits. And maybe it's just a really broad term. I think it's a term that just was really broad until the modern age. So maybe like one of the points I make in the troll book is that we are always understanding paranormal figures in terms of races or species, because that's how humans are used to think about things. Like we try to divide everything into some kind of tribe, and maybe this is not medieval thinking. Maybe some of the terms are actually much broader, and they just mean, some cult figure that has more powers than you have.
Yeah.
Could be any one of them. So that's what I suspect Álfur meant in the Middle Ages.
Because I don't think it's in the Troll Inside You, but one of your articles, you said just that people in the past didn't seem to think that the elves were a superior race, that they had powers. They had paranormal powers that ordinary people don't have.
Yeah, and then like they become like a mirror race to humans, more glamorous types of humans in the 19th century folktales. And then they get like smaller than us in the 20th century, which says a lot about the 20th century.
Yeah.
Paranormal figures tend to diminish in size, and it becomes like not a case of them protecting us, but us protecting them, which might be interpreted in the way that the man is now his own god.
Like yeah, right.
The god than man today.
Yeah, well, sort of we are, aren't we?
Yeah.
Sometimes you have to pinch yourself thinking about our technology, even like you and I.
Yeah.
At the other side of the earth, like we're literally, if we went through the earth, I'd probably get to Iceland.
Yeah.
And we're talking in real time, no lag. It is magic, isn't it?
Yeah, it's kind of magic, and it's invented in a very random way
Mm.
originally. Like I read a book about Marconi, and apparently he knew no physics. Like
Yeah,
he didn't understand any of. He just was just making experiments, and then he invented the telegram or whatever
yeah,
it was,
yeah.
wireless transmissions.
I read an article recently, a lady in Iceland. I think she was being interviewed in the 70s, but she said she reckoned she'd met elves and been into their houses and been into the rocks and was quite big in there, bigger than it looks. The interesting thing is she reckoned, actually, I think it was from the 50s, but she sort of said that they have better lives than us. They've got better technology, nicer clothes.
Yeah,
Um, and it was really sort of almost a sci-fi thing. It was like,
yeah.
as if she was sort of seeing us 50 years on with all our luxury and ease, and she's back there,
I,
drying the clothes through a roller or something.
I think in the 20th century, like the elves and aliens began to merge quite a bit. Like there is a lot of alien belief,
Yeah,
and some of the description of elves in the late 20th century are like, people have been watching Close Encounters of the Third Kind,
yeah,
and
right.
they envision the elves like Spielberg envisions aliens. So 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 this is all merging, and this is one thing about the paranormal. It cannot be kept separate because it's people's experiences, very much defined by culture,
Mm-hmm.
and they see the thing that they're kind of culturally uh, conditioned to see, and they interpret them in a way that is like fits with their worldview. So when the worldview changes, we get different, like maybe the experience is much the same, but there's a
Yes.
completely different definition of it because we have different ideas about how things work.
And that's where our technology gives us a different mind, where flying is not something only gods do for us. We can all fly. So we think, yeah, well, that's just like for me, growing up, crazy about astronautics, being an Air Force officer.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, yeah, the idea of this could be flying crafts and space stations, and that doesn't seem that far fetched to me.
This could also be the reason, like a committed atheist will never see a paranormal figure
Yeah,
because a committed atheist doesn't believe in a paranormal figure. So whatever they will see, it won't be a paranormal figure
yeah,
because the definitions preclude such a thing. And this is like not always recognized is how much we are defined by our experiences, like also by our I think kids clearly they would see a lot of things, but they don't really have the language skills to. And then once we are raised, we have entered some kind of dogma, like whatever it is, and
yes.
then that controls however we look at things.
The consensual hallucination.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, exactly.
yeah,
So, and like sometimes people leave their dogma and go on new paths, and then they sometimes change their definitions of
yeah,
what they actually. But like Christianity also has its own like ways of explaining things that cannot be explained. Like it can't be like, and interestingly, Christianity kept folklore handy. Like Christianity never tried to eradicate folklore. They just said, "Oh, this is folklore." But all these things that people saw, they had to see them. Like the church could not do anything with that.
yeah. I'm a person gets very enthusiastic, even though I'm an old man now. I've still got a childish enthusiasm for all sorts of things. I always liked the idea of flying saucers and UFOs, and I love science fiction movies, but I never really believed that they were real. I thought maybe they are, but I never actually believed it. You know what I mean? And then we didn't have good internet here until about 7 years ago. Where Australia, in the country like where I live, we are behind the rest of the world in a lot of ways. So we finally got a reasonable internet, and I started watching a lot of YouTube, and I went down this rabbit hole of people who said that they'd seen UFOs, flying saucers, been abducted, whatever. And then I was still like, oh, yeah, I don't believe this, but it's interesting. And then I found this playlist of about 100 interviews with a couple of astronauts, many generals, admirals, very high-level people, and also old people who seemed very straight and conservative, but talking about these wild things they'd seen. And so I started watching this playlist, and I remember getting to an interview with an astronaut, Gordon Cooper. He was like the third American in space in the 60s with the Mercury program, and he was a hero of mine when I was a little boy. I really followed the space program very enthusiastically, and he's talking about, this guy's like got the right stuff. He's like a fighter. His ears are all burnt off where he's had some kind of aviation accident, and he's been into space a couple of times, and he was a test pilot, and he's got this drawling Texan sort of accent, and he says, yeah, before I became an astronaut, we were scrambled over Germany because there was hundreds of these things coming. He's in an F-86 Sabre, gets up there with his squadron, and there's like hundreds of these flying saucers, like literally like two saucers together. These things are everywhere, and they start flying off his wing and playing around with them and then taking off. And he said, I can tell you those things weren't from around here. And then he's, once again, before he joins the astronaut program, he's got a crew of people videoing on Edwards Air Force Base. They got a very long runway, which was eventually used for the shuttle to land on, but it was, for fast jets. And they were setting up some kind of radar, and they were filming it. And this craft landed and put down 3 legs, and his guys, who had 16mm cameras, like ran forward and were filming this thing, and they got up really close, and then it just lifted up, pulled the legs up, and went. They rang him on the walkie-talkie, and he said, bring it in. So he rings Washington. They say, don't look at it, we're sending somebody down. Righto, sir. So he gets against the window, he's having a look, and he said it was clear as day. You could see the craft, you could see the legs. And at that moment, I had a sort of like I was born again, I sort of went, I believe this stuff. I believe this is real, And then I started looking at it from a different angle, because I thought, I really do believe this is real. So I started to think about all the other stuff I'd watched.
Yeah.
And of course, it's a minefield of paranoia and, but it's
some of them are hoaxes, but they don't really prove anything about the rest. Like, it's interesting to me. Like, we have this idea that we live in a non-religious world now. But, if you look at the popular YouTube videos, they're all about the Bermuda Triangle and the Dyatlov incident. I cannot tell you how many videos I've found about the Dyatlov incident, and this endless fascination with the unexplained. And of course,
what's the Dyatlov incident?
Like, it was in Siberia, some Russian students who had an avalanche or something, or nobody knows really what happened to them, but they all died. So this is like a hugely popular thing, and all podcasters must at some time deal with this, because there is this fascination with the unexplained, and it's sometimes of course, people wish to come up with a theory that explains it. But in a way, the fascination lies in the fact that it's only a theory. Like
Yeah.
the mystery is still there.
Yeah. It is fascinating, and it's partly to do with our day-to-day lives are often quite mundane and boring, and it's so sexy to.
But at the same time, like scholars who talk about like sagas, they talk about like the belief in paranormal as if it's something in the past. In the Middle Ages, people believed in elves and trolls, but now people don't believe in these things. But people do believe in these things or other things, and so there's not this clear uh, cutoff between realism and the paranormal that people seem to think. And of course, the sagas were respected for being realist, and they are, but they all have paranormal events. Every
Yeah.
single one of them is a paranormal event. And the thing is, the paranormal is a part of realism because realism is, in a way, how you make your characters credible, and they can be just as credible whether they have met a ghost or not. Like
Yeah.
it doesn't really, there's no way of really, using fantastic elements to distinguish between supposedly realistic and not realistic narratives.
Yeah.
So this is like one of the many ghosts I'm fighting against in the troll book. In a way, it's a fight against everything, like I'm sort of taking on quite many ideas about sagas that I no longer believe in.
Yeah.
But it's also necessary, like, to think about these things, like to start afresh and not just like repeat scholarly opinion. And this is like, I do believe in global warming just because I find it very reasonable that technology has an impact. But like when people say the majority of scientists believe in global warming, that's not an argument. Like what the majority believes in, that doesn't change it. Like the
Yeah.
scientific evidence changes it, but how many people believe in it has nothing to do with it being true or not.
Yeah. That's so true.
So,
That's so
so,
true. You're such a breath of fresh air for. Well, it's not just that. I find your scholarship really invigorating, and I also think it's Old Norse studies have gone from this
yes,
hype. Back in the 80s and 90s, it was such a thing. And
yeah,
now I'm just appalled. Like I went to the Queensland University. The University of Queensland used to be a hub, and
yeah,
I would haunt the library there in the 70s and 80s
yeah,
because that's the only place I could find the sort of books I've got behind me now.
yeah,
And I think I've got a better collection than them, actually.
yeah,
I think my collection is one of the best, thanks to John Simons. But I loved that library, that undergraduate library. It was just heaven to me. And I was poring over books they'd collected since the late 1800s. There's books in German and Swedish and all sorts of stuff that I couldn't at all deal with, but I still loved to look at it and think, well, one day I'll be a grown up Norse scholar and I'll be able to read this stuff.
yeah,
And then I went there a few years ago and they said, oh, yeah, all that stuff's in Stack
yeah.
out in the country town where no one ever goes. And it's like, what? Why? Why is that?
Well, there was this paradigm shift in Old Norse studies from being completely like historical, textual in the 1960s. And then there was the influence of structuralism, and people just began to ask far more varied research questions. And this was like, I would call it a golden age of Old Norse between 1960 and maybe 1990. And then it is kind of hit by the dominance of English. Like people don't feel they need to learn languages anymore. And this is not good for small languages such as Icelandic.
Mm.
Also, the recent trends maybe are not as helpful to Old Norse studies as the 1960s trends. So I have a feeling that Old Norse has not quite kept up the force it had 30 years
Mm.
ago. There's not enough like reading. Like people have gone a bit away from the text into things outside the text, such as like of course, archaeology and history and things like that. And maybe there's a feeling that the text have been interpreted enough, but they haven't. They are
No, they
still
haven't.
they are still a mind to explore. So I think, but I am not worried because I think like these texts have a power of their own, so they will always attract new generations. But and you can see now there's a huge interest in Old Norse because of what is it called, the Vikings, the TV
Yeah,
series, and things like that. But obviously, if it doesn't go in hand with language learning, it will always be a bit superficial.
yeah, yeah.
And that's the problem. Like people want to read the sagas and learn a bit about them, but not to study them enough, maybe, because that requires so much dedication.
It's a catch-22 because I've been involved with reenactors here
Oh, yeah.
over 20 years or so. I'm always encouraging people to learn the language, to read. For me, I don't understand why they don't want to speak the language while they're sitting in their camp being Vikings. They're cooking a big pig on the roast. Why wouldn't you want to be talking Norse to each
No,
other? That would be so cool.
the idea is that it's not important to learn languages anymore, any languages. So
I
this is
just don't
this.
understand. I really like Australia is a very monolingual place. We're very multicultural, but you know, my neighbours are Sikhs, so they speak Hindi and English, but
Yeah,
that's their culture. As me as a typical Anglo-Celtic Aussie we've been here 5 generations.
yeah,
No one speaks another language. It's unheard of. I'm the weirdo.
yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
yeah,
people think the fact that I spoke Japanese is amazing, and then when they say, "Oh, I speak a little bit of Icelandic," what?
yeah, yeah.
That can't be possible.
And like Japan is a huge power, very close to Australia, and still it's a bit weird. Like people are not ready to apply themselves enough. Like
Yeah,
I think that's a problem for all languages now.
but it's so
Except,
much fun. Like
yeah, I know.
I sort of, even though I'm no kid, I sort of blush with pleasure when I speak to Icelanders and they actually understand me. It
Yeah,
just
yeah, yeah,
feels so great. It's like, wow,
yeah, yeah.
they
It
know what
is.
I'm saying.
It is a kind of like a wondrous experience that people are denying themselves.
Yeah.
So in a way, it's a bit sad, but it's the same everywhere. It's also in Iceland. It's hard to get people into studying the languages here.
It's funny, this week I've had a couple of experiences where I've thought in Icelandic.
Yeah, that's good.
And yeah, I've always tried not to translate from English, but I mean, the Icelandic words came to me and I thought,
Yeah, yeah,
well, I don't sort of really know what that word is, but I know it's right. It was just,
yeah,
you know
yeah,
what I mean? Like it just came out of me as natural. I
yeah.
thought, that's actually right. That's right. But it just came to me very naturally. It wasn't at all trying. And
Yeah,
that felt really good.
yeah. So I have to go sadly, but it was so nice to see you finally and
Absolutely.
participate in the podcast or in the YouTube channel, I
Yeah.
guess.
Yeah. Well, it's a
It's,
thrill to talk to you, and my viewers will be stoked to listen to you. And
yeah.
I can't wait to meet you again in Iceland. And
Yes, in August.
thanks so much for organising for me to have a
Yeah.
viewing of manuscripts. That's going to be incredible.
It might even be in the building where we are now, but it's a bit unsure when the manuscripts are going to be moved.
Mm-hmm.
They're quite sensitive, so they cannot be moved until everything is ready. It has to be the exact like humidity and temperament and things like that.
I'm quite happy to wear a suit, with a big
Yeah.
gloves.
You're allowed to take pictures at least, so
Oh yeah.
you will to document it.
Oh, wonderful.
So
Okay.
see you then.
Bless.
Bless.
I'll see you again soon.
Okay, thank you very much.
Have a great day.
You too.